What is going on, everybody? Thanks for joining us today for our live stream about The Exorcist, with the release of David Gordon Green's new flick, The Exorcist Believer, right around the corner. My guest, Martin Kessler, and I figured it was a good time to sing the praises of William Peter Blatty's original novel, as well as William Friedkin's movie adaptation. And we're also going to be dipping in and out of some of the sequels, the ripoffs, the prequels, the unofficial sequels, all that crap. And as far as spoilers go, it's going to be a little complicated when it comes to avoiding certain topics when reviewing these movies or discussing them. But what I am going to do, I'm going to add time codes in the description after the live stream. So if you want to avoid hearing about how horrendous The Exorcist II Heretic is, well, then that will help you. But for now, I just got to say, spoiler warning, all is anything and everything is fair game. So let's just dive right in. I recently read this fucker for the very first time. I've been intending to do it for decades, and it did not disappoint. And there were even a few nights where I was tempted to turn on the lights because I was afraid. It was like a feeling I had not experienced in decades, and I would have to sleep with my door to my living room closed because I kept looking up to see if fucking Reagan was standing in the doorway. So, Mr. Kessler, put all the movies out of your brain for a second and make the pitch. What are your thoughts on Blatty's novel?
I mean, I think the novel's brilliant. I'd seen the movie beforehand. Actually, I think I had seen all the movies that were out at the time beforehand. And then when I read the novel, I got a used copy at a bookstore for like 85 cents. I think it's probably the most value I've ever gotten out of anything entertainment-wise, because I've read this book a bunch of times. And the movies did go out of my head when I read the novel. I just got sucked up into it, and it really gave me a different experience than the film, even though I think the film, it's about as faithful as you can probably get as an adaptation. What really surprised me about the novel is how philosophical it was, how much of a procedural it was. You know, Blatty's talked about how he didn't set out to write a horror novel. And I think the novel is horrific, but it's horrific incidentally. You know, it's this drama, it's this mystery story that unfolds in a very logical, linear way until you start running into something that's completely irrational. And I always found that really compelling. Supposedly, I guess it was inspired by this real case of exorcism in the 1940s that Blatty had heard of when he was a student. But I think it's that kind of story that sounds very intriguing, but then you look into the details and you realize, like, oh, there's nothing supernatural there. It was just a
I can remember as a kid, everyone was saying, "Oh, The Exorcist is based on a real story," and I was like, "Oh my god!" Because I first saw this when I was 10, and I was completely, totally, utterly destroyed by it, and I was fascinated by anything and everything. But this is also the pre-internet age, and plenty of urban legends and a lot of bullshittery was flowing around.
There's definitely a lot of that. I mean, afterwards, one of the priests who was involved with that basically debunked it himself and was saying, like, oh,
Gotcha.
The boy would imitate them speaking Latin to mock them, and that would get written down as speaking a language you couldn't possibly know. A lot of that sort of thing. I mean, it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've seen that documentary, My Medieval Horror, about Daniel Lutz, who was the child in the family that the medieval horror movie was based on.
Gotcha. I've not seen it. No.
There's nothing supernatural there. It's just this boy who was traumatized by an abusive stepfather who had delusions of the supernatural. And it's kind of a depressing documentary, but it's good. And there's some interesting stuff in there, like how he had false memories that came from the movie, because, you know, when you're a little kid and you see a horror movie that's supposedly based on your life, some of that stuff kind of filters in and it feels like, oh, that really happened. But
it's like when somebody tells you a story that you repeat so many times, you start pretending like it happened to yourself, and then eventually you don't even know anymore, did it actually happen? Like, your mind can be incredibly unreliable. But what I find fascinating about this book is how William Peter Blatty, how he really did like the deep dive on the religious side, so much so that some of the guys who taught him about religion are in the flick, and they're like, as non-actors, they're actually pretty goddamn good. And I feel like even if you're not particularly religious, it's hard not to be kind of sucked in by just the authenticity of the way they speak to each other, like the way they are like wrestling with notions of faith, and the way that all of them are going like to medical school and studying psychiatry. It just gives you a very, for 50 years ago, very modern take on where the Catholic Church was. And I think it's probably the most heroic depiction of the Catholic faith I've ever seen. I mean, you've got a priest who boxes, he smokes, he drinks hard, he drinks whiskey. Like, these are fucking tough guys. They remind me almost like an Elia Kazan character or something like that. Like, I love the whole depiction. And I think that all comes from William Peter Blatty not wanting to kind of do his teachers dirty and make them proud of his handling of the material.
I mean, I think none of the characters feel like cliches, even though a lot of them could be. I mean, you have one of the main characters who's a movie star, and she feels like an incredibly grounded, relatable character. You have a Jesuit priest who's the most rational one in the novel. And I think that approach, where it feels very grounded, it makes the supernatural stuff real. I
because
think
he's more skeptical than anyone. Yeah. When you have a potential exorcist or, an exorcist to be, who is completely calling bullshit every step of the way and trying in every way, shape, or form to disprove that it's an actual exorcism. As a reader, like, no, you're not seeing it. Like, it's real. And so, it immediately sucks you in. But getting back to the whole depiction of Chris, both in the movie and in the book, I think what makes this movie work well 50 years later, and the book work well, you love the characters. You love Chris. You love Reagan. You're so invested in them, and you're so attached to them at such an early time that when things start to go wrong, she's like, "Mother, like, what's wrong with me?" You're like, oh, your heart just goes out to them because you're emotionally invested. And I think that's one thing a lot of horror movies get wrong, is that the characters are just cardboard cutouts and you don't give a fuck.
Exactly. They feel like real people. And again, I think, if you're trying to create this character who's an actress, it would be easy for her to feel like unrelatable or not quite grounded in the way that Ellen Burstyn makes that character.
She crushes.
Supposedly, Blatty based the character on Shirley MacLaine.
Okay.
And he was friends with her. I think at one point,
Richmond, Virginia, baby. That's where she's from.
I think he maybe even offered the role to her, and he was like, "Yeah, you should do it. It'll save your career." And she was like, maybe she didn't want to do it. And then, there were a couple other actresses who were in the mix to play that role. Jane Fonda, who I think said something, Friedkin she said, "Oh, it's like commercial garbage," or something like that. She didn't want to do it.
The movie was commercial. Trash. For people who don't know, this movie, as of 2023, if you adjust for inflation, remains the number 9 most popular movie ever released in North America, like in terms of domestic box office, where it has sold, I think, 110 million tickets, which would make it, if you adjust for inflation, gross over $1 billion just domestically. And the fact that this movie is a little bit more popular than Snow White, but not quite as popular as Dr. Zhivago, always find stunning, because this is not a horror movie that's pulling any punches or let's make it PG-13 to make it more accessible to a wider audience. Like, it's got rivers of profanity, it's got genital mutilation, it's got the most horrific shit you could possibly imagine, and it's still just packed them in over and over and over again. It just shows how if you handle super grotesque graphic content with the utmost skill and the utmost craftsmanship, it can generate massive box office.
It was a phenomenon, both the book and the film. I think the story about the book, initially when it was first published, it wasn't getting a lot of attention. And then Blatty, I think he had good TV connections because he had been a comedy writer for a long time. He went on the Dick Cavett show to fill in for somebody else, and Dick Cavett wasn't prepared, so he just let Blatty talk, and he talked up the novel, and people went out and they were picking it up, and word of
I can't believe he was a comedy writer. I love watching interviews with Blatty. He's the least
so
funny human being I've ever seen.
I think a lot of comedy writers are like that, though. You talk to people, comedians, or you expect them to be funny all the time, and some of them are, but a lot of them are very like dour, serious people. And it's funny, he talked about how when he was pitching The Exorcist as a novel, it was like, Blatty, the comedy writer, doing this thing. And then after The Exorcist came out, he said it killed his comedy career because he was pitching comedies. And they're like, the guy who wrote The Exorcist wants to make a comedy? What? So you can't have it.
See that movie. They should have hired him to write Repossessed. I like Repossessed, but it might have been better if he had been a part of it.
Probably.
Right. Well, let me interrupt with a few questions that I received from the community in advance when I posted last night. And Kit Fletch 1 writes, my question is, did this film add anything to the horror genre, or is it an example like Jaws that there is no such thing? I don't know if I'm entirely understanding the question as phrased, but I guess I'll hit it back to you. I've heard both Friedkin and Blatty talk about how they think of this as like a supernatural mystery with like documentary flavor. For me, I categorize horror very broadly. So for me, I have no problem admitting that it is not only one of the best horror movies, but it did contribute a lot of things new in terms of dialogue, grotesque, just bodily mutilation, practical effects, and things like that. So I think it had several technical and dramatic innovations. But what about you? Like, do you categorize it as horror?
I think I do, but again, it's sort of horror incidentally to what it's really focused on. And I think if I'm interpreting the question right, if it really brought anything new to the genre, I would say yes, because now it's a whole subgenre of these exorcism movies, and maybe also the creepy kid genre. I think you can trace a lot of that back to The Exorcist as well, even if they're not possessed children.
Yeah, I love the creepy kid genre, but there's a lot of good entries even before The Exorcist. But yeah, I'm always open for more.
But I think like that exorcism genre of movies, it really birthed that. And you can find one or two examples that are a little bit like that before, but it's usually like a ghost possessing somebody, or the closest I could find, it's this Yiddish language movie called The Debuk, which Kino Lorber released a couple of years ago. And it's in some ways it's a similar kind of story where it's not trying to be horrific, but it's about this bride who gets possessed by this wicked spirit, and she has to be exorcised by a rabbi. But basically, exorcism was not in the popular culture until this film came out. I mean, you have that great scene where Chris McNeil's asking, like, where do I find an exorcist? And he answers,
you gotta get back to the 1500s.
Yeah. Go back to the 16th century.
Well, I've got a great clip that you gave me in advance where they're talking about how there are no experts. So let's just go ahead and roll that sucker now, because otherwise,
sure.
we got like 12, and I want to include them all. So let her rip.
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
I thought you were supposed to be an expert.
There are no experts. You probably know as much about possession as most priests.
Yeah.
Cool clip.
I love the dialogue scenes in the film, just how they're done, and
most of them are verbatim ripped from the text, where the text will have a much larger scene, and then as you're reading, you're like, oh, for like 2 pages they just cut and pasted it and shoved it into the movie camera beautifully.
It's funny, like Blatty's first draft where he attempted to adapt his own novel, Friedkin kind of rejected it because he made too many changes from his own novel. Usually, it's the writer trying to preserve the integrity of the novel, but Blatty, he was putting in flashbacks. I guess also there were producerial requests like, can you ditch the Iraq sequence? We don't want to pay for that. Can you turn Father Merrin and Father Karras into one character? I think those are probably, in terms of what you'd expect from producer notes, how to streamline something kind of reasonable. But Friedkin, he loved the novel.
He said repeatedly it's the best material he ever had sent to him as a filmmaker. It's like a possible project.
So a lot of the scenes in the movie are just word for word exactly the same as the novel. The descriptions, everything about it. I think also, if you look at the novel, the casting for the film is a miracle. If I read that novel before the film existed, I would say you can't make this as a film because it's uncastable. You're never going to find the right.
Was it Stacy Keach who was originally cast as Father Karras?
I think Blatty kind of made it up to him getting booted by casting him in Ninth Configuration a little bit after. But Jason Miller, who had just won a Pulitzer for his play, oh gosh, I just watched it the other night and now I'm blanking.
No, he's a playwright. You got an actor and playwright.
But he had done his play, and I guess Friedkin had seen it, and there's a lot of Jesuit connections, and Jason Miller had some religious training, and he just saw the picture of him and thought, like, okay, this is the guy. this is him. And you know, there were a lot of people doubting. Like Jason Miller had done a little bit of acting, but he wasn't like an actor. You know, he had done, you know, police instructional videos and stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
like
if you're a
this. He had done
studio
theater
about to spend a
acting.
couple million on an outrageous horror movie, you'd probably think, can't you find a way to put Robert Redford in there, or Paul Newman, or some, like, you know, glamorous, handsome actor, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Let's just say Jason Miller, but for me, he's a quintessential 70s actor where he's kind of rugged, brooding intensity,
Yeah.
incredible character. But the next question from the community
Champion
tab
season.
beforehand.
That's the play.
Oh,
Sorry.
beautiful. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we have a question from Tom-VI or VJ9LZ. Where/when did you first watch The Exorcist? I actually have a brief little story. Age 10, went to a slumber party. It was a slumber party with a horror movie marathon way out in the boonies in North Carolina. You know, like the father was handing out cigarettes and fireworks to the kids. So he had like cases upon cases of like Coca-Cola lying around. Like it was like a kind of a fun rural extravaganza. And we had a stack of videotapes, including The Exorcist, that we were planning on watching the entire night. So we saw Nightmare on Elm Street, we saw Poltergeist, we saw The Exorcist. That was my first time seeing it. And we just kept pausing it and pausing it and pausing it. And when, you know, VCR spectrum, when you would pause, sometimes you would get like 2 bands of static across the screen. But we kept trying to pause it in the dream sequence where Damien's mother is coming out. Yeah, and we were trying to freeze it. But anyway, DVDs obviously have made that considerably easier in subsequent years. But we stayed up all night. It's my first all-nighter. And there was one kid who didn't come to the school for the rest of the week because he'd never seen a horror movie, but he didn't want to get uninvited to the party. So he was just going to white knuckle it and ride it out. And he will go unnamed, but he just got completely, totally ravaged by the experience. But when did you first see it?
I saw it when I was a kid. I just rented it from the video store. There was no event or hype. I think I was just working my way through the horror section of the video store.
Like, I'm up to E. Let's watch this one.
Pretty much. And actually, I didn't really find it super scary as a kid. I think like you hear some horror people today talk about like, oh, it's supposed to be the scariest movie ever. It's not this. It's just a bunch of people talking. Ooh,
horror fades.
Like,
yeah.
I think it's a film that gets scarier the more life experience you have, the more you engage with it. Because a lot of the most horrific stuff in the film, it's not the head spinning around. It's not the green vomit and stuff like that. It's you know, relating to Chris when her child's going through something and she doesn't know what, or
her director has been murdered and she can't understand. Yeah, like the way she just expressed rage and pound her against the wall. Well, for me, it's been a lifelong obsession, and I've actually visited the stairs on multiple occasions. But I put together a little clip, including a still image as well as some live action from 2016 and from 2021, where I visited the famous location in Georgetown. But there's something about that location where, to the present day, 50 years later, when you stand at the bottom and look up and see how fucking steep they are and how sharp they are, it is the most ominous film location, I think, in North America. It just, if like some asshole at some point is like, oh, can't we pave that over and like put up a gymnasium there or something stupid? But for the time being, for the last 50 years, those stairs have been there, and they exude just this vibe, this pulse, and people like will wait in line at the bottom, like talking about The Exorcist and like looking down and everything. It's just, it's incredible. I strongly recommend anybody, if you ever happen to find yourself in DC, even if it's just for a layover between flights, go visit those stairs. You will be impressed.
I've seen them in person, but I've never been brave enough to go up those stairs.
Yeah, it's a little quad workout. It'll get your butt and quads burning. Well, let's look and see who has joined us. Oh, I'm seeing a super chat. Holy moly! Let's see who. God damn it! Sometimes
it's like Amanda.
Yeah, Amanda Krafchick, who's been on Wrong Reel a million times. Hang on, I don't know why I'm never able to get the goddamn fucking super chats to appear on the screen where they're supposed to, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it from it's just an emoji saying woot with the $20 donation. Anyway, Amanda, I cannot read the super chat if there's one there. I'm just seeing this it looks like a Super Nintendo controller or an Xbox controller waving its arms. I'm trying to get it to go onto the screen. God damn it. Every single time I do a live stream, I'm going to figure out how to do this in between. And then I completely, totally fucking forget to do so. So I apologize for not giving your super chat the due. Actually, here it is. Boom, boom, boom. Now I can show it. I'm getting an option, put user in timeout or ban user. No, I don't want to do either of those options. I like Amanda Krafchick. Nobody knows more about video games and pre-code Hollywood than Amanda Krafchick. I'm also seeing Bill Scurry in here, John Cribbs, the Vinyl Cues, William Mendoza. William Mendoza was recently in Wrong Reel talking about the hospital. A lot of familiar faces. Fred Schaefer's in here, Eric Patterson. Hello to everybody. And in the latter part of the live stream, we're going to do our best to get to all the questions and comments and so on and so forth. But for now, I'm going to try and just continue to pick Mr. Kessler's brains. So let's get to my second question. You already touched on this a little bit. But
Sure.
William Peter Blatty famously adapted his novel into a screenplay and sought out Friedkin to direct. He just won an Oscar for directing The French Connection, said the manuscript was the best material he ever received, but he did have some harsh words about the first draft and came back to him with underlined passages. But to what degree do you think the movie is a successful adaptation of the original text, and how would you characterize the love/hate/ creative tension between the two storytellers over the decades? Because I saw them interview each other in the late 90s before the version you'd never seen had come out.
They were like a divorced couple.
Yeah, and there was tension. Like they were both aware of the fact that they had collaborated on one of the most popular movies ever made. But to what degree do you think Friedkin did justice to the material? And how do you interpret their friendship? Because then there are a couple different documentaries where we see them talking to each other, and it's not always buddy. Oh, I'm seeing you're not connected. Hang on one sec. So we lost Martin for a sec. Martin, you're back. I know you could hear me because we had a problem before before we started. Did you hear everything I was ranting and raving about?
I sure did.
Fantastic.
Sure,
well, let her rip.
I think in terms of how successful the film is, I would say the film it's great. I think by the nature of translating that novel to film, you lose certain things. I think you lose a lot of the interiority. I mean, there's parts of the novel where it's just Chris MacNeil thinking about the inevitability of death and what comes after, and you sort of get in a mindset that, I think Ellen Burstyn's fantastic in the film, but there's no way to really do that in a movie without putting in like a cheesy voiceover or something like that. So I think there are certain things the film is limited in exploring. I think the theatrical cut, obviously it's a great film. There's one scene that was cut that is later put in the longer version that I wish had made it into the theatrical version, because otherwise,
scene on the stairs.
Yeah, the scene on the stairs. That's the one that I think
it's more Max von Sydow. Yeah,
and it's just it's this moment of reflection on what this really means and what the significance of this is, and have these characters kind of wondering, why. And I think
Friedkin said he thought it spelled out the themes too clearly, but Max von Sydow's acting is so fucking good.
He's great.
I can go either way.
Although, just looking at how that scene was cut down, I do like the moment in the theatrical version where they just sit there and they look exhausted. They're just sitting in silence. And it makes me think of, times when, people probably in the chat have had this experience when you have a relative who's very sick and dying or something like that, where sometimes you just sit and you've got nothing to say, So I do actually like how it was cut down, but I think that was an important scene. A lot of the other stuff that was cut out, I think you can take it or leave it. A couple of the scenes in the version you've never seen, which for a while was the only version you could see. I think some of them are good scenes, but you can cut them and it doesn't really destroy the integrity of the theatrical version.
Yeah, I guess what's interesting is seeing how in the movie is so faithful to the book, but in the book, it's interesting seeing a scenario where Reagan never breaks her straps, and it's all the horror still equally effective, even with her lockdown. Although when the bed starts rising up and shaking, I'm like, where are her arms strapped to? Like, wouldn't that rip her fucking arms off? Like, imagine if she's tied up to the wall. Anyway, I don't know quite how the straps were laid out, but I did enjoy that. And I guess in terms of being an adaptation, when I first saw the version you've never seen, I hated any scene where she left the room because I felt like it broke the tension or the underlying tension or just kind of the whole structure of the movie. But in the book, she leaves the room quite a few times and like slithering along the floor and crawling down the stairs.
Licking
it
ankles
more,
and stuff like that.
it is more faithful to the book, having
Yeah.
her leave the room from time to time. But I love seeing how the exorcism scene in the book took place over days. And when Max von Sydow's character sadly passes away, I love how she's like talking. She's like, "Oh my God, I can't! Like, you quit her! Like, come back!" Like she was enjoying the face off. And she tells him when he walks in, "You're gonna lose this time." I'm like, "Oh, this is like Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta. Like they've fought many times before, and this is just the latest battle in an ongoing feud." So yeah, the ending of the book is a little different from the movie, but goddamn, yeah, I love both.
What's sort of funny too, one of the things that Blatty kept bugging Friedkin for was to reinsert this sort of happier ending, where you get this feeling that like, okay, life goes on, and
the devil didn't win. Yeah,
he wanted the special effect changed also to make it clear that like, Karras was possessed, and then he fights it off long enough to jump out the window, but what's funny
in the
to me
book,
about that,
in the book, you don't even see it. You hear it through the door. Chris hears it. So it's like, why are you so preoccupied with that scene where you decided to withhold it from the reader in the text?
Blatty was talking, I think a little bit of it, it's like that George Lucas effect where you revisit something 25 years later and just as an artist, you've changed. But like Blatty was like, "Oh, that seems way too ambiguous." I'm like, it's so much more ambiguous in the novel. Like, it's weird to me that that would be an issue. But I think there's a little bit of that like syndrome of
Apocalypse Now Redux. I hate it when directors go back and change, or writers go back and change things. Like, let it live as it, unless it's like taken away from the filmmaker by like somebody in a suit with like a narrow chest and a long nose who like cuts to pieces against their will. Like when the Wild Bunch was restored, cause for celebration. But like with Apocalypse Now or The Exorcist or E.T. or any like, movie from the 70s or 80s, these directors got older and wanted to go back and fuck with them. It's like, no, just make a new movie, but just let when people go back and revisit The Exorcist, they want to have the experience that they had when they first got exposed to it. And luckily, both on Max as well as on the many Blu-rays of the movies that are out there, it's got the version you've never seen, which is now mislabeled director's cut. It's not a director's cut. It's an author's cut. It's a writer's cut. And it's also got the theatrical cut. So I think both have a lot to offer. I prefer the theatrical cut because that ending of the theatrical cut is a sledgehammer. It's just an ice pick through the forehead. You got the shot at the top of the stairs. They turn around. The music kicks in. You see the title, and it's devastating. And I think the version you've never seen / director's cut, mislabeled director's cut, it lets the audience off the hook, lets them breathe, it lets them exhale, start talking about Casablanca, and this is the beautiful friendship.
It basically says life goes on, which again, I can see the value of, but I do prefer the ending of the theatrical cut where it's just blunt. The film is done. I think, I always say denouements are for wimps. I think sometimes you just got to end your movie where the ending is. And, the book has an epilogue, and I think it just feels like a different medium, that kind of a change. But what I really don't like in the version you've never seen are the all the added devil faces and the CGI.
They're excessive. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about like whether or not this is a horror film, and I feel like adding, her face transforms into the CGI monster face. It's like, oh, you tried to turn it into a horror movie. The way it was before was scarier.
Especially this movie is like in the Hall of Fame, if not like the all-time greatest of all time of practical horror effects captured in camera. Where like if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of movie magic and how to do it, it's as good as it gets, which leads me to my next question. There's several great documentaries out there about the making of The Exorcist with tons of footage that was shot behind the scenes by DP Owen Roisman at that time. Of all the practical effects and movie magic on the set that you see, like what is the most impressive between like Dick Smith or like the temperature or the vomit or whatever? I mean, I feel like it's a cornucopia of legendary practical effects, but which ones here 50 years later, you're like, God damn, like they were making movies better back then.
The makeup, of course, is incredible. I know Dick Smith talked about, initially he'd done something that looked more like a devil face, a demon face. And he showed up to set and Friedkin's like, it looks too much like a mask. Do a new one. Yeah. He's like, I'd been working on this for months, and and he had done enough of these masks in his basement. I think Rick Baker might have been apprenticing under him at that time, making latex, but he had done like dozens of them because you had to have a new one for every time you reapplied it. So it was all just out the window. And I think, what they did
I love how it's
was
like gangrenous self-inflicted wounds is such a, once again, you, it makes sense. It's organic to the story because she keeps ripping at her face with like the crucifix and her nails. It makes sense that her whole face would just be self-inflicted massacre, and it just looks fucking incredible.
And that's so much more effective, I think, for this film, where it has to feel grounded and you have to have that doubt of whether this is real or not, whether she's really possessed or not. I think a lot of the film exists in this nebulous region where like you're not 100% sure either way, is this all psychological or is this all supernatural, until you kind of get this leap of faith at the very end. But I think it had to ride that line. And if you look at the makeup tests,
when I first saw it at age 10
scenes,
though, I was still going to Sunday school and church every single Sunday, and I knew of it like a movie about the devil. So when I went into it as a kid, never was there any doubt that I was about to see a supernatural possession story that I could appreciate from that spiritual angle. But now, as I got older, religion just became less and less a part of my life. And it wasn't like a hard break. It just kind of faded and kind of, I just stopped thinking about it. I stopped going to church like in 1995. But do you think this movie would work equally? Like, imagine there's a group of 10-year-olds having a slumber party today, because I guess the more explicit parts of horror fade very quickly. If you watch a horror movie from the 30s, they're really cool, they're really interesting, but they're not scary. Do you think the fact that religion is less important in modern day life, or at least kind of old school religion, do you think that would detract from new generations discovering, or is this just one of those movies where every generation more people are going to discover it because of like 4K releases and that sort of thing?
I mean, if I was going to recommend a horror movie to a bunch of 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds to watch at a slumber party, it wouldn't be this one. There are fun horror movies out there. This isn't like
I'd probably recommend Fright Night or The Lost Boys.
Yeah, something like that. I think in terms of the religious stuff, I mean, I had secular upbringing. Religion, it was like a cultural thing. It wasn't belief. And like in Czech culture, devils are basically comic figures. They're stories with devils that are funny and humorous, and they're trying to trick people, and like there's nothing to be scared of really, unless you're bad at Christmas. Then maybe you'll get thrown in a sack with one. But
nice, thrown into a sack with one.
Yeah.
I like it.
But I think like for me, it never really felt important whether you go into the story believing or not, because it makes you believe. I think again, like I identify a lot with the Chris McNeil character, where she's basically secular. She might even say she's an atheist.
She's a defiant atheist, where she's like almost like an aggressive atheist. So if she finds a cross in the bed, and she's like, I want to know who put this here.
Well, also, because she wants to know who might be putting these ideas in her daughter's head that might be causing this to happen. If it's something psychosomatic, it's like, oh, who introduced this idea that's driving my daughter crazy? But I love at the novel at the very end, she still kind of says like, yeah, no, this doesn't make me believe in God. Like even after going through all of that, I feel like
movie never enters the room during the actual exorcism. In the book, she has like a moment where she kind of comes in and is like, oh, and leaves. But I know in the new movie coming out in a couple of weeks, that's a big part of the story, is that she never actually witnessed the actual exorcism. But I want to get to a few comments from the chat before I get too far behind.
Sure.
John Smith writes, watched the 4K yesterday. It looks amazing. Yeah, I mean,
what blew me away?
Old school early 70s flicks shot on film with like the best lighting and best DPs of that era. They have aged very, very well.
I haven't seen the 4K yet. Maybe last time I saw it projected on film in a movie theater, it was on 4K, but I watched it on the Blu-ray. What blows me away are the how they hid the strings when she levitates.
Yep.
They talk about in the behind the scenes,
spotted,
like,
which makes them much harder to see.
Because if you see just a straight white line or black line, it can stand out against the background. And they just, by breaking that up, they talked about how it kind of hides it in the shadows and in the grain of the film. And, if we're talking about brilliant visual effects, I would count that one, because I never even think about the strings when I'm watching it. There's a couple effects in the movie. I think if you think about them as effects, it would take you out of the movie. But
Yeah, like the
they
vomit.
pulled
I've
it
heard
off.
too much about the vomit. Like when I first saw the vomit scene when I was 10, I had a physical gag. I was like, I gagged when I saw it. It no longer has that effect on me at all because I know I know what it's made of and how they shot it out of her mouth and how it hit Karis in the face by accident when they're aiming for his chest and shit like that.
I mean, Max von Sydow's makeup. When I was a kid, like Max von Sydow just looked like that already when I was watching him in 80s movies, 90s movies.
Yeah. But he was still a young, handsome
like,
devil when he made
yeah,
this, and
no,
they made
he's
him look
playing
incredible.
a character. I mean, to talk about, okay, we're going to make this film as grounded and relatable as possible, and one of the most important characters is going to be played by an actor who's half that age. Like that's a real gamble,
But it helps that he was one of the finest actors in the world, and I feel like
yeah,
that's what makes early 70s Hollywood so cool. Is that these directors who are watching European cinema from the 50s and 60s and taking their inspiration and taking a page. Whoops, we lost Mr. Kessler. I'll reconnect him as soon as the button pops up. But in the early 70s, the fact that you would have people inspired by French cinema or Swedish cinema or Italian cinema, and then would take those actors and hire them to be in their flicks. So I'm just trying to refresh and get Kessler back. It's still saying device not connected. All right, well, he should log back in a sec, but just the way he delivers those lines, like, be silent. I mean, it's classic. So while we wait for Kessler, I'll go through a few more lines. Paul, the bearded one, Downing writes, the TV show wasn't bad. I actually never saw the TV show, so I cannot agree or disagree, but I might have to hunt it down at some point. Mulvey747 says, what's up? John Cribb says Exorcist XS. Yeah, we're going to be getting to some of the XS here in a sec, but Mulvey747 also writes RIP William Friedkin. Yeah, I feel like it's the end of an era losing him because he's one of those quintessential 70s directors where he truly gave zero fucks and had an incredibly adversarial personality, and I think that page up. Here we go. Martin Kessler, adding you back to the stage. Boom, boom, boom. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Kessler. I was just singing the praises of William Friedkin, who sadly
I could hear the whole thing. I don't know what's causing.
Yeah, because your image right now is super clear, but it just says device not connected, and so.
Which is strange because I can see myself when you're disconnected. But anyway, just talking. I've seen the comment about the TV show, and I never watched the whole thing, but I think as far as like network TV shows go, it seemed all right. I know they probably used an idea that was pitched for a film sequel that never quite happened. But also, I'm seeing the comment about Lalo Schifrin, and just talking about Friedkin. I know Friedkin was a little bit of a maniac making The Exorcist. And
I mean, you're being very kind. He was a lot of maniac, but I feel like, oh shit, we lost Kessler again. Hang on. Oh no. Well, I'll finish his point. The big debate is, are you coming back? Here you are. You're back. Yeah, I got you again. Yeah, it's like his behavior by normal objective standards. It'd be like the kind of thing where I would punch him in the face if he talked to me that way, treated me that way. Like, perfect example at the end when Father Karras is dying at the bottom of the stairs and the actor is reading him his last rites, and the actor wasn't getting it right because he wasn't an actor, he was a priest. So Friedkin said, do you trust me? And he said, oh, of course I trust you. And he smacked the shit out of him. And he said he had so much rage and so much adrenaline going through him that his hand is shaking as he does the scene. So for us as the audience, like, wow, that's powerful. But is it unforgivable behavior? Well, if somebody slaps me across the face, I'm slapping them back. But you tell me, like, what do you think about kind of megalomaniac directors in the 1970s?
Just what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of a story from the making of Shivers with David Cronenberg, where
when Lynn Lowry wanted to be slapped.
Yeah, she wanted to be slapped just to get her to that place where she could cry on screen. And he's like, all right, and he slaps her, and Barbara Steele sees this, and she like pins David Cronenberg to the wall by his shirt, and she's like,
I've worked with Fellini, I've worked with Louis Malle, I've worked with all the greats. And he's like, no, she's asking me. She's like,
I didn't.
She's like, can you start slapping me? He's like, no, we're not. We're putting the kibosh on this now. But anyway, yeah, Barbara Steele, she was ready to go for it.
But Friedkin, the story about him firing Lalo Schifrin, where it was like the middle of a recording session, and he's pulling the like tape out, and they're like, no, we can still sell it to another movie, and he's like throwing it in the driveway, being like, that's where it belongs in the driveway, and fired Lalo Schifrin in front of everybody. And
I think he was already a pretty cocky guy from his work in the 60s. But when you win Best Director for a film like French
Yeah.
Connection, he just had that fucking, like, nobody would say no to him under most
Yeah.
circumstances. And I guess I'm divided because I feel like there's always a way to get the effect you want without like completely wrecking people's safety or their self-confidence or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, do you actually need to hurt people in order to get great footage? No. But you also, like, the more demonic, fucked up side of my personality says, but you cannot argue with the final results because we've been admiring the final results for half a century. And so
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you can be of two minds on this front.
Yeah. And I mean, there's stories about taking risks on French Connection or Sorcerer, and it's like, ooh, I wouldn't have done that. Like,
Yeah.
I just,
He and his
you know,
DP had a signal when he would say, oh, turn off the camera, but he would had a secret signal so that Owen Royceman knew to get the cameras rolling. And during the famous scene where Ellen Burstyn hurt her back,
yeah.
they knew it was going to be the last take. And so not only does she fall and scream in pain, the camera tilts in and really soaks up the moment where she cuts loose. So it's
she
like,
was, I think, rightfully pissed at that.
Oh,
Just, like,
yeah.
the fact that he made sure to get the shot before calling the ambulance. It was, and I've heard that she had permanent damage from that. Like, that's
I've
something I
heard
think you
that
couldn't
too.
get
At least
away
I read
with,
that in Easy Riders, Raging
yeah.
Bulls. But then you also see scenes where they're like hugging and yucking it up and doing interviews after the fact. So I
I
think,
mean, I think like sometimes
fans might
that
not
stuff,
forgive, but I think she is forgiven.
I think she is forgiven. You know, I mean, there's times like if you have siblings, you can do stuff like that to each other and
Oh
come
yeah, I
out
put my
being
brother
like,
in the hospital with a
you know,
padlock
it's
once.
like, you know, it's funny too. Sometimes you see these kinds of disputes between two people, and it's like everyone else, you know, we demand a public apology, and it's like, well, it wasn't between you two. Like,
Yeah,
they can
like
sort
they're
it out.
over it. Well, we mentioned
Yeah.
hospital. We have one clip prepared. Remember, you were telling me the story a
Yes.
couple weeks ago about people that were laughing at the movie until suddenly they weren't laughing at the movie.
Yeah.
So tee up this clip, which still
Sure.
makes me a little green to the present day. Where when I was rewatching the movie a couple days ago, when we got to the scene, I paused it and walked around, exhaled, and then I watched the scene.
Yeah. I mean, Ellen Burstyn talked about while she was working on, God, it was probably Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I think she was filming while The Exorcist was coming out. She heard about people throwing up and fainting, and she thought like, oh, like, you know, what are they reacting to? Is it the head spinning around? And no, it was the medical scenes because they feel so real. And I've seen this firsthand. I went to
the voice of the fucking doctor saying,
yeah.
now you're gonna feel a little bit of pressure.
The
I hate
light,
that
everything,
calm,
it feels
reassuring voice of doctors. I wish doctors would say, what I'm about to do is totally fucked up. Just grind your teeth together and just embrace it. But that bedside manner is so disturbing.
I mean, the tone of the film is clinical. And like, I remember I went to a screening, they had like those digital screenings at the Cineplex. I went on Yonge and Dundas, the movie theater in Toronto, and they were playing the version you've never seen before, which I'd seen before. And there were these two teenage girls in front of me who were kind of like giggling and laughing early in the movie. And, you know, I kind of get it because, you know, when you're a teenager, anything that's 40 years old, there's going to be stuff to kind of laugh at, saying it looks dated or whatever. And then it gets to that scene with the medical test
and the arteriogram.
The arteriogram. And these girls just go quiet. They look at each other and then they leave. And they didn't come back for the movie.
Well,
like,
let's play the highlight.
Yeah,
let's play the highlight because as they're about to put the needle into her neck, and they're like, you know, like, don't move. The way he gets so quiet, the way he says it, anyway, it just makes me ill. But here's the real showstopper from that scene. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, that's an actual radiologist and his assistant. I hope the technology's gotten a little better in the last 15 years. So it's like, whatever's wrong with me, I think I'll take that over this over this treatment.
You know, and Ellen Burstyn, like, you really feel for Chris McNeil when she's getting fed up with seeing all these doctors and going through all these tests. And in the book, it goes even to in even more detail about all the psychological testing and medical testing and just trying to exhaust every possibility. You know, I feel like the book, you know, it's this almost thought experiment of if exorcism was real, how would you come to that conclusion if you were somebody who didn't believe in exorcism, that this is the solution for a demonic possession or whatever it is. And, you know, it goes through every single test, every single thing. And you feel like she's at the end of a rope, that it's the last resort.
It's the opposite of how most horror unfolds. Most horror films kind of unfold away from the status quo, where everybody like is unaware of what's happening. But what I love about this, it's doctors, it's out in the open. Like everybody in the world in Georgetown is aware of what's happening, and they're all failing to diagnose. And usually the cold light of day dispels horror. The fact that we got all these doctors and psychiatrists somehow amplifies. We got entire conference rooms full of doctors trying to figure out what the hell is going on with her.
Yeah. I think, again, that's something that Friedkin brings to the film, with that background that isn't really horror. You know, Blatty wanted somebody who could bring that.
Friedkin literally saved somebody's life with the documentary. A guy on death's row, and he made an early documentary that they reopened the case, and the guy was released from prison. So he quite literally saved the guy's life with the documentary.
And supposedly the guy that documentary was about, you know, he was speaking very earnestly to Friedkin, and then they'd roll the cameras and the guy would like freeze up and not seem earnest on camera. So Friedkin's like,
don't make me slap you.
Well, he didn't do that, but he was like, you're lying, you're lying to me, and just like provoke the guy into being earnest. So I think like there was always that side to Friedkin of being provocative and trying to provoke reactions out of people that other filmmakers might struggle with. I mean, the story about how Friedkin and Blatty met, I always thought was pretty great, where I think Friedkin was up to direct something that Blake Edwards might have been producing, if I remember right. And Blake Edwards asked Friedkin, you know, what do you think of the script? And Friedkin's like, it's a piece of shit. And he said, well, the writer is in the next room. Do you want to meet him? Tell that to him. And Blatty had co-written the script, and he comes in and Friedkin tells him, he's like, yeah, it's a piece of shit. And Blatty's like, yeah, you're right. And he said that's what kind of endeared him to Friedkin at first. And
honest to a fault. And he remained that way. Was present up until the present day. I mean, some of the interviews from the last like 10 years are fucking hysterical. He's hilarious. I love watching interviews with him. But let me get to a few more comments from the chat. We got a comment from Mr. Scurry. Are you going to talk about the Friedkin movie? Most definitely. Tom writes, I've heard much from about Exorcist II from Mr. Kermode. Yeah, Exorcist II, the Heretic. We're going to get to in a sec. We're not going to go too deep on that one because, as I've said to Martin in the past, it's the worst movie I've ever seen by a director that I love. Like I love Point Blank, and I love Deliverance, and I love the Excalibur. I fucking hate Exorcist II, which I've been postponing and like putting off watching for decades until I watched it just for this live stream. So holy moly. Comment from William Mendoza. Will you be covering Repossessed? Saw it for the first time yesterday. Instant fan. We will be getting to Repossessed here in a sec. Charity Schmidt writes, there is a great podcast that details the original story of Boy Possessed that inspired the book. Give us the title of the podcast when you get a chance. Mulvey747 writes, grew up going to Catholic school in NYC. A lot of the older priests were like some of the ones in The Exorcist, at least when it came to smoking. Haha, yeah, I mean, these are tough guy priests. I fucking love them. And there's something about getting Lee J. Cobb in there as the detective, which is, for me, is a link to movies by Sidney Lumet like 12 Angry Men, or movies like On the Waterfront, which are like these quintessential New York movies where I just love how, even though the movie's set in DC, it's got an East Coast ruggedness that would be missing if they'd shot it in San Francisco.
I mean, a lot of it was shot in New York because I think they were skirting around child labor laws to use more of Linda Blair, but you're right, it does have that kind of East Coast flavor to it, which I think sort of sets it apart. And you see it like a lot of the actors and people involved working with each other later on, and a lot of the things they worked on had some of that feel as well. But Lee J. Cobb, he's also fantastic in this film, and he's somebody who wasn't getting a lot of work at that time because I think he had named names during McCarthyism, so that Hollywood kind of turned its back on him. But he's wonderful. So
did Kazan.
So did Kazan.
So did Sterling Hayden. Yeah, a lot of people got caught in that damned if you do, damned if you don't. And he made his decision. But as an actor,
my favorite scene with him, it's when he goes to interview Chris McNeil, and you know he's being a detective and he's putting together like, oh, there's the little clay figurine that Reagan left, and you can feel him being a detective and putting it together in his mind. And then when he asks her for the autograph, and like that kind of melts away, and he's just a movie
I lied,
guy,
it's for
you know.
me. Yeah.
The way he says that, he's so embarrassed. And then Ellen Burstyn's performance in that same scene is fantastic, where she's putting up that front because she knows that, you know, Reagan's killed somebody.
Yeah. She's barely holding it together.
Yeah.
And the moment the detective leaves, mother, like all these horrible sounds, you bitch, and all that horrible
even
shit.
Just on Ellen Burstyn's face when you see her close the door and lock it, and she just lets the emotion out. Like I think there's a moment Tarantino might have swiped for *Inglourious Bastards*, which was like very similar. But
I like a lot of weird moments also. I mean, or I guess like minor moments when you see the behind the scenes on the shoot, where you have a bunch of kids protesting a building that may be about to turn down or about to go up. Building's about to go down, and she's like, wait a minute, and she's talking to the crowd. It's such a great behind the scenes look at 70s era filmmaking and how the director doesn't even know why the building's going down. It's like, shall we call the writer? He's in Paris, and like all that stuff. But like, it's just a great little moment where you get to, you remember this is a great heyday of great filmmaking and a lot of cool filmmakers making great like classic movies in both the East and West Coast. And Friedkin leans all the way in. I think that's one thing that the movie brings to the table that the book only kind of hints at is, obviously Friedkin wasn't about to do an unconvincing portrayal of an actress.
Well, Jack McGowan as Burke Dennings, like the way he plays it in that scene where he's so
hammered.
Not I mean,
fast.
Supposedly he like the character was largely inspired by Blatty working with J. Lee Thompson, who did Guns of Navarone, and I think he had done one of the Planet of the Apes movies. But like apparently whatever they worked on, he was like barely functional alcoholic, and I don't know. I also knowing that like McGowan died almost right after filming this scene. It's
he's not a healthy person. Yeah.
No, but it's an interesting character. Like I mean, the fact that he's this like little kind of pixie-ish guy directing, he always makes me think a little bit of Roman Polanski.
Yeah,
and like maybe it's also the fact that McGowan worked with him on Fearless Vampire Killers, and I think he did another one with Polanski also. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. But I think like also the film, one way you could.
Whoops, we lost Mr. Kessler. He'll be back momentarily. Up here he goes. Add to stage.
It didn't go anywhere. So.
Yeah, we didn't miss a beat.
I'm gonna have to figure out what that is. But I think like one way you could interpret the demonic possession in the film is that it's an allegory for the effects of sexual abuse. And there's, maybe not in a literal sense. Like I've seen somebody do a video analysis where they tried to make that fit literally. And I think it's more just.
Well, did you get to see the mentality of a predator, especially in the book when there's much more about how Captain Howdy is kind of her friend early on. Yes. And she has a few moments. She's like, oh my God, like he never was like this. But how Captain Howdy, it was like inch by bloody inch over a long period of time that he slowly wormed his way in. And I think that was one of the best things about the books, that we get more insight into the early days of Captain Howdy and Reagan and how he was able to get embedded in her.
Exactly. And I mean, just one way that the Burke Dennings character could fit into that, it's like, of course, everyone who has read the novel has that question of like, wait, why was this grown man in this girl's bedroom, like unsupervised when he got thrown out the window? There are little things like that. And I think you can read into the novel that, it's just, I think in a broader sense, a metaphor for the terrible things that happen that are irrational. Like for me, the book and the film, they're both sort of about where, this rational 20th century mindset collides with the irrationality of the universe. Like the Karras character, I always really related to just how he's also like a detective investigating this exorcism and trying to figure out what's really happening. And it's not.
And I love how he's done such a great job, but then Max von Sydow shows up and he just throws out everything. He's like, at this point I've decided that there are 3 different personalities. Like there's only one. He keeps cutting them off. Once again, this is an old adversary, but I love the contrast between their 2 styles.
When he said, would you like to hear the case history? And von Sydow just goes, why? Yeah. Like it's completely irrelevant to him, and he's not trying to be rude. Like von Sydow, he has that kind of he seems fragile, and he seems like somebody who's carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he's just there's something really confident and assured about him when he shows up, but also very gentle. Like he's
yeah. Chris immediately feels like very like warm and welcoming when she opens the door, and she's like, "Who is this person?" And he just has a way of putting everybody immediately at ease. But I just realized we're about 55 minutes in, and we still have many more movies to go. So I think what we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to return to the subject of the original Exorcist after Believer has come out, because I do want to get to some more questions, but also want to get to some of these other flicks on this topic. But Colin Lacativa writes, Blatty is the Rosetta Stone of the concept that the best horror is written by comedians. Yeah, well said. Leo Alvarez writes, this is Mark Kermit's favorite film period. Anyone here feel the same? I'm with him. Early 70s for me is a very special vein, whether you're talking about international cinema or domestic. And like probably the only rivalry would be like pre-code Hollywood from the early 30s. But when it comes to Hollywood cinema, in terms of a lot of different great directors of different ages, all working at the same time, whether they're talking about like grisly old bastards like Sam Peckinpah or the new breed like William Friedkin, it was an excellent period of filmmaking. And William Mendoza writes, finally, some Repossessed talk. Yeah, I guess we got to, before we get to Repossessed though, briefly.
I like John Cribb's comment about every time Kessler disappears, there should be a quick shot of Pazuzu. You need to smack that Pazuzu button.
Absolutely. I'm going to show a clip from Exorcist II Repossessed, and I'm just going to get your hot take.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, not Exorcist II Repossessed. Exorcist
the
II,
Heretic.
The Heretic. Let me just show a quick clip, and then you can just... Anyway, I'll let you put that movie in its grave, because it's too traumatizing for me even to discuss. Now, there was hypnosis, a brief scene in the first Exorcist movie, and I thought it was handled very well. And that's that really creepy shot of the camera following the hypnotist down as Reagan, rips his balls off. What went wrong with The Heretic?
I think Linda Blair described it as being too many cooks in the kitchen. I think when they were making The Exorcist, nobody knew it was going to be a hit, and it turned into a massive, massive hit. The second time around, the studio's like, oh, this needs to be a hit. And it was a very expensive film, and there was a lot of producerial input that was maybe not to the film's benefit. There was also a bunch of behind-the-scenes issues. I don't know how much you want to dive into some of these. I mean, I found a Linda Blair interview where she had a really great quote where she said, like, oh yeah, like we had a really great script for The Heretic.
I don't
wish
believe
we had
it.
shot it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Well, everyone thought they had a great script. And apparently it just got rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. And like some of the original ideas were pretty bizarre. Like it was all about like humanity forming a collective consciousness and forming a new God out of like the collective unconsciousness of humanity. It was almost like a Neon Genesis Evangelion kind of a thing. And I mean, the final film, I would say it's also not a horror film, but instead of being like a grounded drama with horror elements, it's like, oh, this is a science fiction movie.
Yeah, it feels like a weird early 70s science fiction flick made by people under the influence. And one of my favorite stories with the making of, which Friedkin told like at a film festival, they're doing a test screening, I think at the Vista up on Sunset, and all the executives were like ensconced in the back row, like rubbing their hands together greedily, just about to like give each other high fives. And the mood in the crowd shifted very abruptly. And about 15 minutes into the movie, somebody apparently stood up and said, the people who made this piece of shit are in this room. And everybody was like, oh, it was almost like a riot. They kind of rose up, and the executives had to basically flee from the theater. I have a feeling that Friedkin's adding a little embellishment to the story, but it makes a great story about these execs thinking they're counting their dollars prematurely, and the audience turned against them. But I fucking hate this movie unreservedly with an absolute vengeance, and I've got nothing positive to say about it, apart from maybe the fact that I like the fact that a couple actors got paid well for device not connected. Don't worry, he shall return, much like the devil. Here he goes in the Exorcist movies. But you mentioned to me in a DM that you felt like the ninth configuration was almost kind of the Exorcist sequel that we deserved but never got. Give people a heads up about William Peter Blatty's directorial debut.
Sure. Actually, I did a podcast on the novel a little while ago over on the Pink Smoke with John Cribbs, who's in the chat. And for me, like Exorcist II: The Heretic, it's trying to be a direct sequel. It's Exorcist II: Pazuzu Boogaloo, and there's a lot of stuff that's very attractive about The Heretic. I think like visually, it's slick. It has a great cast. It's kind of nice to see Louise Fletcher not play a villain. I know Richard Burton was like hammered out of his mind for most of the film. Actually, it was almost going to be John Voight, and then he got into a fight with Boorman, and then they wanted Christopher Walken, who I think might have actually helped a lot, but instead you get Richard Burton looking off the wagon. So that's a direct sequel, and it's trying to build mythology, and it's trying to explore and explain, and that's not at all what I'd want from an Exorcist sequel. But the Ninth Configuration, it's almost like a side quill. If you go by the novels, it's about one of the main characters is the astronaut that Reagan says to, you're going to die up there. And it's about, this sort of military controlled castle with all these mentally ill people. And somebody shows up who's maybe a psychiatrist, who's played by Stacy Keach. And it's kind of a strange tone. I think like Blatty really has his own directorial style, which is a little bit hard
I struggled
to pin down,
with the tone for like the first half, but as they got darker and more aggressive, I was able to kind of get into it. But
I
there are
like
times
the tone,
where you've got too many inmates in control of the asylum, and it just felt a little too silly for my taste.
Well, it's a really weird mix of like broad 60s comedic farce, and you see like Blatty's roots there mixed in, but it's also like a philosophical debate, kind of like My Dinner with Andre thing at times, where you just have two characters talking about
fucking Hamlet,
the nature of existence and things like that for like large portions, and then you have this psychological thriller aspect. But for me, it's a continuation of a lot of the themes explored in The Exorcist, just kind of moved in a different direction. And I remember when I first saw the poster where it's just a photograph of the astronaut on the moon looking up at this crucified Jesus, and I was like, whoa, like what is that? Is that an album cover? Like, what am I looking at? And then it's like, oh, this is set in the same universe as The Exorcist, but it's not a sequel. And for me, that was what I wanted out of an Exorcist sequel, is not an Exorcist sequel, because I feel like if you go by the novel or the film, at the end, everything's kind of wrapped up for the characters anyway. I think, most of the characters are.
Yeah, there's no runway left for where there's nowhere for the story
I feel
to
like
go.
If you ask me, like, what happens to, Chris or Reagan McNeil after the story ends for the first one, it's like, oh, they go back to their lives and they have happy, normal lives, and this thing, they put it behind them, and I feel like that's all you need. You don't need like the continuing adventures of
but instead we got 50 years of movies and whatnot, which reminds me of the line that John Cribbs posted. He said, Dimmy, why you do this to me? I feel that way about a lot of these Exorcist spinoffs and ripoffs and prequels and whatnot.
There are people who love Exorcist II: The Heretic. I mean, my friend Spencer Seams, he said like, oh, like he vastly prefers Exorcist II. Martin Scorsese vastly prefers.
I'm just going to finish his sentence. Or maybe it's better if it goes unfinished. If Martin Scorsese said that he prefers Exorcist II, Martin Scorsese, I'm assuming he ripped like 10 lines of cocaine. It's like, this is fucking amazing.
I mean, the thing I hear a lot of like people, because I've heard it from a couple people now who say like, oh, they don't like The Exorcist, or they don't want to watch The Exorcist, but they love The Heretic. And it's like, I was raised Catholic, so there's something that I don't get. But apparently, for, some people, I think like The Exorcist II, it's a more traditional kind of good conquers evil type of story. It's very stylized. It doesn't have that kind of sense of realism, or
it makes a great double feature with Zardoz, where it's like one of these like creative misfires that's kind of entertaining for unintentional reasons.
Boorman didn't really want to do it. He passed on the first Exorcist because he said he had daughters, and for him the novel was just like torturing a young girl and he couldn't take it. And then he almost passed on Exorcist II, and it was going to go to Sam Osteen, who was the editor who Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Graduate. And he also did that movie. He directed Sparkle with Irene Cara, who died last year. But he was going to do The Heretic. And then I think they just threw like a pile of money at Borman. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And he had a really hard time with it. I think like producers were interfering. He got really sick. I think when they were collecting dirt to use for the Africa scenes, he contracted some kind of like fungal infection and he was like out for a month. So some of the shooting wasn't even done by him. And then like the film comes out and word of mouth was terrible on it. People were like laughing at it. So, you know, he actually went to screening and he said, you know, any scene that people were laughing at, he tried to cut. So they actually re-edited the film and then put it back in theaters, I think about a week after it had been first released. And, you know, it's hard to make a movie. And, you know, if you break it down, like,
but you know, but he has made good ones in the past. I mean, when I was watching
what
The
he
Heretic,
said is that like Excalibur was just as much trouble as making The Heretic 2, except it resulted in a film he could be proud of. You know? So sometimes it's like that, you know. But I
when
think
I was
like,
watching The Heretic, I was just standing in my apartment with my hands on my hips, like, this is the dumbest fucking shit I've ever fucking seen.
I don't like it, but like, you know, I want to be generous to it because I know people like it, and it's got a good cast. It's got like some scenes you could look at the scene on its own. Like I was watching when Reagan's sleepwalking on the balcony on top of this skyscraper, and it's like, oh, this is like a good scene. You know, for me, it's just one of those things where it's absolutely not what I'd want out of an Exorcist sequel.
Well, what I liked much more, and it actually got included Linda Blair. Let's talk about Repossessed for our friend William Mendoza, who has got a great podcast. He writes, I like Mario Bava's Shock. It's a clear Exorcist ripoff. Yeah, Mario Bava, I'm a big fan. But let's get into Repossessed. This is a few years after Naked Gun, which obviously came after Airplane, where Leslie Nielsen was very successfully making the pivot from straight serious actor to one of the funniest human beings who ever walked or crawled. And I will not claim this movie's on the level of Airplane or Naked Gun, but it has its moments. Like in the first 5 minutes, when you hear her voice that she's talking to him, it's like, put that cross away. She's like, mine. And like just saying all this weird shit. I was giggling uproariously. And then it's got like obligatory nudity, or not obligatory nudity. What's the expression for nudity that doesn't need to be there, but conspicuous nudity? Or anyway, it's got fantastic fucking nudity, my kind of nudity. Make the pitch. What the fuck is Repossessed, and how did they get Linda Blair to come back for this role?
Repossessed is a comedy sequel to The Exorcist.
No, we lost Kessler, but now he's coming back.
What is happening? All right. Repossessed, it's a comedy sequel to The Exorcist, and it's Naked Gun era Leslie Nielsen, and it's got broad farcical kind of jokes in it and weird gags, and a lot of it's kind of making fun of like televangelism. And I guess Linda Blair talked about, I actually remember this when the film screened on the Scream channel back when that was the thing. They had like a little interview with Linda Blair where she talked about how when The Exorcist came out, it kind of took over her life in some ways. And I've heard her say in other interviews where, you know, she was this 12-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl, and people were asking her like heavy theological questions doing the press for it. And, you know, it's a heavy burden to be the star of a hit when you're an impressionable teenager. And many people, their sanity does not survive. No. And I think, you know, she acted at other films, but like she was always kind of that, you know, the girl from The Exorcist. And like, I'm guilty of that myself. I remember I saw her in she's got a really hot locker room sequence in one of these kind of cheesy women in prison 80s skin flicks. I got a story about that because like I remember watching one of these films and there's a nude scene with Linda Blair. I forget if it was like a Jim Wynorski movie or something. But like you want to avert your eyes like no. I had that exact same reaction where it's like, this makes me really uncomfortable. I'm not somebody who's usually uncomfortable with nudity. I'm like, what? Oh, right. It's because like in my head, she's still the little girl from The Exorcist. And it's like, oh, this is weird. I can't. I now she's like in her 60s. But anyway, we got a clip from Repossessed. So cue it up. What do you give people some context? It's Linda Blair. She's back. She's possessed again. It's hilarious. All right. Check it out. Let's let her rip.
On a visit to the little town of Bethlehem, a young shepherd came upon Jesus and said to him, Lord,
Lick me! cool or what?
It's the cornolingus move.
I mean, it's stupid, but it's fucking hilarious. Like, I mean, that scene in the first movie when she's saying, lick me, and she's making her mother force feeding her own body to her mother. I mean, that's the moment where Chris realizes something's going on here that's just not in her mind. But goddamn, that's what satire should do. I feel like whether you're talking about like Scary Movie or any sort of like, I feel like in the 80s and 90s, there's more of a tradition of making movies that were just making fun of other movies, like Hot Shots Part 1 and 2.
I feel like
in that tradition.
I mean, the later movies like Disaster Movie, Meet the Spartan, that kind of stuff just kind of ran that trend into the ground. But they should bring it back. I like these spoof movies.
Fuck yeah!
I mean,
especially when they take like an exact scene and just do like you can run them like side by side and just laugh.
Leslie Nielsen just looks like great in the priest outfit with the collar. I'm like you just stick him in that outfit and it's funny, you know, because he's so deadpan and he kind of fits that like Max von Sydow kind of look a little bit. But you know, I think there's something really like as a comedy, Repossessed is pretty hit or miss. But if you watch it coming off of Exorcist 1, 2, 3, it's such a relief. It's such a palate cleanser. You know what I mean? I think Linda Blair said that for her, it was a really cathartic experience actually to make Repossessed because, you know, you have this thing hanging over your head for like your whole career up to that point. And it was her way of kind of just saying like The Exorcist, it's just a movie.
Yeah.
You know, you can make fun of it and you can kind of move on from it. So I think Repossessed is a great one to watch after you've watched all the other Exorcist movies and you're up late at night. And I
like it better than Heretic.
Although Heretic might be funnier.
Yeah, maybe so. But let's get into one of the big dogs because Jeff Galt writes here, Exorcist III is so underrated. What a great film that is. So let's talk about Exorcist III, which I feel like we can bash unnecessary sequels all day, all night. But with The Exorcist III, we have a situation, it's a weird situation where it's written by William Peter Blatty, it's directed by William Peter Blatty, but it was almost kind of forced by outside interference to become something that it wasn't originally. So give us the short version. How did the story begin and how did it become The Exorcist III? Oh, right on time. The device unconnects, but we're bringing them back in and it's going to be fucking amazing. All right, lay it on us. I've got your clips ready to go if you want them.
Yeah, so well, Exorcist III started off its life as Legion, and it was going to be like the Ninth Configuration, where it's just sort of a story set with some of the characters who are related to the Exorcist, but its own thing. It was about the Detective Kinderman investigating this Gemini killer who's a little bit like a Zodiac killer, and you know it deals with similar themes, and it just kind of fit into that universe. And I mean, at one point, Blatty wanted Friedkin to direct it, and it sounds like
Friedkin's career was starting to dissolve. He probably could have used the work, but maybe wisely realized I shouldn't.
I mean, I think like what I heard is that this was right after Friedkin had done Rampage, which is also like you could easily slot into this discussion, and it deals with like somebody who has psychological issues, who thinks that maybe something supernatural is happening, and it's a pretty violent movie. And I think he just didn't really want to do something like that right after. Although the film that he ended up making instead was The Guardian, which another horror film. Although The Guardian, there's like one genuinely creepy thing in that like stuck with me since I saw a clip of it or like a little bit of it late at night on TV as a kid, where there's just like that little wooden face, and it's like, oh, it creeps me out for some reason.
But if your idea of Friedkin is to Live and Die in LA or Sorcerer or French Connection, it's not on that level.
No, but so he did that instead, I guess. And then Blatty decided to direct it himself. And I guess along the way, the studio's like, can you make this an Exorcist sequel? So like you see, it's funny when you watch the behind the scenes, there's some behind the scenes where he's calling the film Legion, and then some behind the scenes where he's calling it Exorcist 15 years later, and then some behind the scenes where he's calling it Exorcist 1990, and then like eventually it's like Exorcist 3.
But I can remember being in the theater as a 14-year-old kid, and that trailer started where it's like, do you have the courage to walk these steps again? I was like, no fucking way, because I just discovered The Exorcist a couple years prior. So suddenly here was like a real deal Exorcist sequel,
Okay.
like capitalizing on all those emotions. So I was
Yeah.
primed and ready.
You're taking me back. I was too young to see it in theater, but I remember seeing the trailer on like the front end of a video that I had rented from the video store, where you used to get all the trailers that you would have to fast forward through. But I remember just the trailer for Exorcist III, and thinking like, "Oh, that looks scary."
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I'd say it's got its moments. It's got, I mean, famously one of the most successful jump scares in movie
Yeah.
history, which I have right here. Let's let her rip.
Okay. I did it a disservice because that comes after like a long
What's amazing
build
though,
up.
it's like even without the minute of buildup,
Yeah.
where you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, it still gives me a little
Oh,
jolt
for sure.
all these years later, and it's just a zoom, but it works so fucking well.
Well, and that like hard cut to the statue with the head missing.
Yeah. Anyway, I
It
strongly
gets me,
recommend
yeah.
everybody go see the Red Letter Media video where they discuss Exorcist III. I
Yeah.
think that's the best commentary I've seen on the ins and outs and the ups and downs and the behind the scenes. And they will make you look at it with fresh eyes. I already loved it anyway. I think it's a very successful sequel. And like Jeffrey fucking Dahmer was really into it. They showed that in that TV show about him. Like it made its impact at that time. It's not a hit on the level of The Exorcist, but I think it's justifiably loved, and it's all sorts of cool stuff. I mean, just in George C. Scott growling and snarling his way through that movie is fucking fantastic.
George C. Scott just is wonderful in the film. Like a lot of the lines he gets, again, you get some of Blatty's humor coming in, I think a little bit more than in The Exorcist, but when he's talking about talking with the priest, saying whether or not you'd want to live forever, he said, I want to live forever. And they're like, oh no, you'd get tired. Well, I have hobbies. Just things like that. Some of the dialogue in the movie is very funny, actually.
Yeah, and Lee J. Cobb had sadly pushed on, which is
Yeah.
why George C. Scott is playing that role.
Yeah. I think George C. Scott is a pretty good guy to fill in for.
Carl Malden would have been another good choice, but yeah, these old-fashioned like 50s and 60s actors who had just a different style, a different approach. But George C. Scott, yeah, he's got all the dimensions and all the power you could ever want.
I love the line about favorite movie. I think that clip is also there. I don't know if you want to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll let her rip right
laugh.
now. Legion 1.
Any plans today, Joe?
This afternoon, I'm at the Flicks. It's a Wonderful Life.
Very nice.
Seen it 37 times.
That's commendable.
You have a favorite picture?
The Fly.
The Fly.
It's so good. His voice.
And
Yeah.
then this is late enough where he could be talking about the Cronenberg flick. Who knows?
I always assumed that it was because there's a little homage to the Cronenberg film with the crawling on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Which
yeah,
doesn't quite work for me, but
I feel
what
like
does work for me is Brad Dourif. Brad Dourif is so fucking good.
Yeah.
I mean, Brad Dourif, he always brings the heat, and I feel like he will go when he pushes on to actor heaven. He'll be regarded as one of the great character actors of the last 50 years, going back to friggin' One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's been bringing the heat for a long fucking time, and he never phones it in.
I've heard him say that this is one of his favorite performances as the Gemini Killer, and you can see why, because you can see him savoring every single line, and when he's talking about like decapitating the head and while they're still alive turning it around so they can see the body, and like he's got that smile and it cuts to this really tight close-up on his mouth. Like he's wonderful in it. And I guess initially they couldn't get Jason Miller back, and then
I think he was kind of lost inside the bottle for a little while.
Yeah, I mean there was a good documentary, really good documentary I've seen a couple of years ago. I think it was called Miller's Story, which was all about him kind of going back to his hometown and why he didn't work out in Hollywood. Like he was in
Too much cough syrup.
yeah, I mean he was in a couple movies, but he never really caught on as an actor. Like he was.
Well, I've got a 4-second clip of him from Ninth Configuration, which I forgot to play. So let's let that sucker rip.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
I mean, he's
so good.
Yeah, he's an amazing actor.
And I think he's just one of those people where, his face tells a story. He looks like he's, intelligent and exhausted or tortured and tormented, you know. So I think like he was so perfect for The Exorcist, and he worked so well in Ninth Configuration. And just the other night I was watching The Nickel Ride, which kind of somewhat infamously, the way people talk about it, was the film that he turned down Taxi Driver to make. But Nickel Ride's really good. I was like, oh, this, you know, it might have flopped at the box office, but it's a really awesome neo-noir. And it's,
I mean, I would pay
him
him in a black box theater here in New York, where he just like reads a book to the crowd. He's got that much intensity.
Yeah, if you want to see more Jason Miller, that's a really great one. And it's written by Eric Roth, I think in one of his first screenplays or first film screenplays, and now he's doing Killers of the Flower Moon. So that's like almost a full circle.
Do you think Exorcist 3 would work better if it was all Jason Miller or all Brad Dourif, or do you like the fact that it's both?
I like the fact that it's both. You can actually watch what it was like when it's all Brad Dourif, and I think it still works. But there's something about like the fact that it's this, you know, I'm Legion, for we are many, kind of demonic force where it's changing, and you get this weird psychological effect of you're not sure if what you're seeing in front of your eyes is real or not, or if it's just in Kinderman's mind, or if it's something shape-shifting. And like something about that is really effective to me.
Until Merlin from Excalibur shows up for an actual exorcism scene.
I
mean, I love how they tease his presence in the movie early on. You're like, who's this guy? Like, oh, because this is when the executives force feed the exorcist. But I like, even though the movie's a little more subtle, something about that effect when he's on the ceiling and his skin's coming off. I'm like, that works. It's fucking gross, but yeah, it's having an impact on me. And I just love Nicol Williamson as Merlin so much. To see him in an Exorcist movie, yeah, I'll play. It works.
I think for a long time, the original version of the film that that Blatty had shot, it was like this fabled thing of like, oh yeah, like the film is really great before they turned it into an Exorcist sequel. And, you know, some parts of the film are so subtle and so well done that you feel like at its best, it is as good as The Exorcist. You know, there are a couple scenes or a couple moments where you're like, oh, like when this is firing on all thrusters, it's there. So like, you know, you imagine this perfect idealized director's cut. And for a long time it was lost. Eventually it got released. I think Shout Factory put it out on the Blu-ray, and you can watch it. And it's like, oh, maybe this is subtle to a fault.
Like, you know, maybe the corrupt execs were right, where they were like, sometimes every once in a while, the constraints and needs of the showbiz machinery turn out to be, you know, right on the money in terms of what a movie might need. Because if this movie did not have the stuff that was force fed to William Peter Blatty, maybe it wouldn't be as popular.
It's hard to, I think some of the stuff, like the ending of the Legion cut of the film that was released with the
just a
video,
just a shot,
like I think it's the kind of thing that works maybe better in a novel. But I haven't read the novel Legion yet. That's you know, I've read Ninth Configuration, I've read The Exorcist a couple times. I'm gonna have to read Legion at some point, so I'm gonna want to revisit that.
Yeah, but when you do, we'll circle back. But I wanted, since we're starting to run out of time, I wanted to get to a few more comments from folks. Fred Schaefer writes, "I've heard that Kubrick was offered The Exorcist. That would have been an interesting film." And then William Mendoza responded, "I know The Shining was trying to make that Exorcist money." Yeah, I think it's interesting that Kubrick, he realized, wow, I missed the chance to work with some great material. And then he started desperately hunting for a worthy follow-up. I would have preferred for Kubrick to try something like The Stand, whatever, but The Shining, it might be heresy to say I prefer the movie The Shining to the book, but I love the book, but I just prefer the flick.
I mean, they're two different things in my mind. A couple other people that were offered The Exorcist, Arthur Penn, who did Bonnie and Clyde. Mike Nichols, you know, I think they weren't looking for a horror guy. You know, John Borman, I already mentioned, but
they're just looking for great storytellers.
Yeah, I think like Kubrick was looking for material like that, and supposedly he went through like hundreds of horror novels trying to find something that he could turn into a film. But no, I think Friedkin was right, and Blatty pushed for Friedkin the whole time. I think.
Wisely so. I mean, also, you and I both read that book, Eyes Wide Open, about Kubrick, where they tell, I think it's in that book, or maybe it's in another biography, but there's a great story about Kubrick with like a stack of trashy best-selling horror novels, which in the 70s and 80s, the drugstore shelves were breaking under the weight of all the trashy horror novels, but that he was in the office and they could hear the sound of books hitting the door repeatedly as he would throw them away. There was like a 30-minute break. Found something, I grabbed him, and as it turned out to be the Shining. Well, we've got a few minutes left. I want some predictions because
Oh,
we
okay.
actually are here ostensibly to discuss the next movie coming. So after seeing his movie Halloween Kills, David Gordon Green for me would have to deliver an era-defining masterpiece to rebuild his reputation. What do you think of the trailer for The Exorcist Believer? And are we going to get a repeat of Evil Dies Tonight over and over and over?
I mean, it's tough for me because I really used to love David Gordon Green's films, like his early stuff. If you watch George Washington,
It's incredible.
All the Real
Yeah.
Girls, Undertow, Snow, he was like a really great artistic filmmaker. And then he did Pineapple Express, which I think is actually a fantastic film. I think it's hilarious. But that was kind of like, okay, he's doing his one Hollywood film. He's kind of, going to come out with his reputation intact and go back to doing his thing. And he didn't. He kept kind of going in that direction. And some of his movies were bad, like Your Highness or The Sitter. A lot of them were
It's the
kind of
velvet
just,
coffin, the money sometimes that people if you allow your lifestyle to increase to the point where then you can only accept those roles, velvet coffin is the best way to describe it. You're trapped at that point.
I think he sold out. It feels bad to say, but like, I think some of them aren't bad, but if you watched, Our Brand is Crisis, or the one he did with Jake Gyllenhaal about the Boston bombing, like it feels like anybody could have directed those movies. There's nothing really. Yeah, like he just basically decided I'm going to be a Hollywood go-to guy, and then he had his Halloween films, which
If they made
a lot of money,
one,
but,
I probably could have lived with it. This trilogy, and when Jamie Lee Curtis kept describing Halloween Kills as a masterpiece, I'm like, you've lived and you've gotten too much sunshine in Southern California for too long. Anybody describing Halloween Kills as a masterpiece,
it's just the worst.
It makes me want to use the R word, but I don't want to get demonetized.
Well, I mean, what's kind of funny to me is, it wiped the slate clean with all the other Halloween sequels. It's like, forget those even exist. Here comes the real sequel trilogy.
We're gonna get just as dumb, just as quickly.
If you do something like that, I'm like, you better really have something great to back that up. And then Halloween Kills is like the worst Halloween film.
Yeah.
Halloween.
Some might say the second of the Rob Zombie Halloween reboots. I actually think there's some scenes in there that are dramatically superior.
Good, actually.
Yeah.
I like it more than the first Rob Zombie Halloween anyway. Halloween Ends. There are a couple scenes where you can forget that you're watching a Halloween movie that are pretty great.
Until the tacked on stupid
ending. And then
ending.
it gets to the tacked on, like you've got to have Jamie Lee Curtis fight the guy again. And it's like, oh, this sucks.
I'm just going to go out. I'm going to make my prediction now. I think that The Exorcist Believer will probably be better than Halloween Kills, but a far cry from Exorcist III, a far cry, obviously, from The Exorcist I, far cry from the novel thing. At best, we're going to see it's like leftovers that have been in the fridge for a couple of weeks, and somebody pulls them out, heats them back up, sprinkles some hot sauce on it, and tries to make it taste good again. There will be some 16-year-olds who have never seen any movie with an exorcism in the title. I'm like, hey, this is kind of fun, kind of cool. And I imagine it'll do just fine commercially. I will be there opening day because I need movies to review. But I'm keeping my expectations and my hopes at rock bottom. But I'm thrilled that Ellen Burstyn is getting a massive payday. And you sent me an article or an interview where
that interview is great because nowhere does she endorse the movie.
Yeah, but she was like, look, if you will pay me an obscene amount of money and direct it toward a scholarship that's important to me, then I'm in. And so she just found a way to turn it into a good cause.
It's really great. In this interview, she goes, what happened was I've turned down many versions of The Exorcist II. I've said no every time. This time they offered me a whole bunch of money and I still said no. And then they surprised me and they came back and said, we doubled the offer. I said, okay, let me think about this. I thought, that's a lot of money. Let me think about it. The next thought that came to mind was, I feel like the devil is asking my price. The next thought that came to my mind was, the price is a scholarship program for talented students at our master's program at Pace University. That's my price. So I then went back and upped and ended up getting.
No, Mr. Kessler. Here you are. You're back.
Bastard.
We lost you right as you said. You were saying.
I went back and upped and ended up getting what I want. And I've got a scholarship program for young actors. So, I mean, Ellen Burstyn, she's a legend. You think about like Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore, Last Picture Show. And she still acts and stuff. I feel like
I fucking love her in the Last Picture Show. She's incredible in that.
She's a legend. She's like a real Hollywood legend, and like I feel like I don't
And
know
a
if she was
legend that would
ever like a
only
movie star,
emerge in
but
an
she
era
was
like the early 70s. I
yeah.
think that era was waiting for certain flavors of actor or flavors of filmmaker where they could really thrive. If
Yeah.
she'd come along 10 years earlier or 10 years later, she might not have had that streak of incredible movies.
But I think like in terms of trying to get that like same effect of, oh, Jamie Lee Curtis is coming back to Halloween, I'm not sure it's going to have that effect on the film's box office. But I think if you look at all the films that Exorcist spawned in terms of like knockoffs and imitators and films that were just influenced by them, Exorcist movies, the only way to really set yourself apart from those and tie yourself to the original in some way, there's two people you can get right now who are still alive. There's Linda Blair and there's Ellen Burstyn. And I think, they went the Ellen Burstyn route. Maybe, I don't know if Linda Blair's going to have a cameo or something like that, or if they're going to try to get her for
I hope they'll just insert a few
sequel.
clips from Repossessed and just see what happens.
Maybe when she asks if they want split pea soup and the music goes dramatic. But, Burstyn, I feel like she's kind of made no apologies about selling out to do this Exorcist sequel, but she's done it with class. I really got to respect that. So, it's great to see her get this giant payday and create a scholarship out of it. I don't know if it's going to make the film do any better, but at least it kind of legitimizes it as like, okay, this isn't the Pope's Exorcist. This is an actual Exorcist sequel.
Yeah.
And it's probably, my guess is it's probably going to be fine. I mean, David Gordon Green, I'm not expecting, I hope it better be it better be better than Evil Dies Tonight, Halloween Kills. But what I'm expecting is just a standard Blumhouse, couple people in a house horror movie. I think it's probably
they got
average,
their assembly line going. They know what they're doing. They know how to crank out low budget movies that generate big box office, and every once in a while one of them seriously outperforms. And even though I don't like David Gordon Green's Halloween movies, it should be said his first one was insanely profitable.
It was. So I think it's probably going to do just fine. It's even people who don't even consciously realize that this is a sequel to The Exorcist, they're going to say, oh, it's a spooky kid movie, exorcism movie. It's Halloween season. Let's go see that. So I think whatever they're predicting for box office,
October needs horror films for people to see, but the one I'm looking forward to seeing is Suitable Flesh, which is kind of like a Stuart Gordon kind of Lovecraftian perverted horror movie. The trailer just dropped yesterday, but that's coming at the end of October. So that is my horror movie to see. But can I steal you for a few more minutes to answer a few more questions in the chat before we wrap up? I remember I booked you for 90 minutes, but
I can keep going. Yeah.
All right, very nice. Well, we
got
to
just about this new Exorcist sequel. It also looks like just like a typical horror movie, and I think like what was kind of great about the film and about the novel is it wasn't a typical horror anything. I mean, I read there's this great Fantastique magazine article about The Exorcist, and it's got interviews with like Friedkin and Jason Miller, and I know Jason Miller talked about the novel, and he's comparing it to like Kafka's Metamorphosis and Dostoevsky, and it's almost like that caliber of a thing, in my mind it is anyway.
Well, there's a certain point where like trashy bestsellers transcend their kind of commercial trappings and become something more. And I remember fondly the era where every grocery store and every drugstore just had thousands of horror novels for sale, but a few of them have withstood the test of time and have become genre classics.
And The Exorcist, it was such a phenomenon. I don't know if it's possible to repeat that. And the sequels are kind of evidence that in some way the first film, it's this sort of singular thing. And I think Legion is pretty fantastic. It's got a cult reputation, but it's more of a cult movie.
Well, you need the perfect marriage of great material combined with a combative filmmaker coming off his biggest success, who's ready to say fuck you to the entire world. I'm making the movie that I want to make. That's a rare situation where somebody's got the box office clout and the the momentum to do whatever the hell he wants, who also happens to stumble upon great material all at once. That's a perfect storm where it's hard to recreate that.
That's how you get That's how you get No Marshall Rich, where he goes off and makes a roar with a bunch of lions into Beatrice.
Absolutely. We'll save roar for another day. Well,
Yeah.
a few more comments. Edmar Faria says hello from Brazil, hello from New York. Bill Scurry writes, Burston is eminence Grice. I don't know how do you pronounce Grise. I'm too illiterate, but eminence
like the
blank
preeminent
among American actresses alongside Gina Rollins. Yeah, I mean, I fucking love and adore her. She's
it was
incredible.
Almost it came down to, I think it was either Ellen Burstyn or who was it? It was Anne Bancroft, I think she said.
She would have been good.
It was one or the other, and then like apparently the story is that Friedkin ran into Bancroft at like the grocery store, and he's like, she looked like hell. You got the part, and Burstyn's like, well, that's not fair. Like when I go to the grocery store, I look like hell, and he's like, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like Friedkin.
But I could see Bancroft in the role. Apparently, they also offered it to Audrey Hepburn, who was kind of getting out of acting at that time, and she was like,
she just done Wait Until Dark, which was very successful. So
that's a great movie, and I think like I can sort of picture it where sweet Audrey Hepburn getting tormented by this. I think actually would have been fantastic. But
the crew would have eaten Friedkin alive if he tried any of that bullshit with Hepburn.
And apparently Hepburn said, "I'll do it, but I want you to come and film it in Italy. I'm not going. I'm not going back to America to film it." So they're like, that's a no-go.
Yeah, they called her bluff. All right. Well, Colin Lakativa writes, I visited the steps in 2014 and had to wait for local joggers and step walkers to stop doing their reps up and down them. If you want to get a workout and get a good burn going, even if you don't like horror movies, go to those steps and run up and down them a few times. Your butt and glutes and then quads and whatnot, they will definitely feel the burn. Oh, and right here, the Vinyl Q's writes, it's Steven Simpson, by the way. I made that. In the back of my mind, it's like I recognize Vinyl Q's, but I think that's your Twitter handle. But then Bill Scurry outed him, right? Steven Simpson hiding in plain sight. Yeah, everyone hunt on Steven Simpson on social media. He is a movie soundtrack fanatic. John Cribbs writes, the live stream has been possessed. I would love to see my live stream get possessed, or maybe if I could get
Pazuzu button.
Yeah, it would be. It would almost be like doing Repossessed if I were to get possessed on a live stream. Ooh, nice. Jacob Corinthos, or I always forget if it's Corinthos or Corinthos, but good pal of mine from Twitter who's a total movie fanatic. He writes, there's nothing about David Gordon Green's last three genre efforts that suggests to me he has what it takes to do a good Exorcist film. Yeah, I co-sign all the above.
I'm not even sure who could do a good Exorcist film today. I think you would have to look at somebody who's not a genre guy. I think you would have to think outside of that.
Dia de la Bestia, and is also doing that show 30
Alex
Coins.
Iglesia.
Yeah, he's got a season 2 of 30 Coins about to come out. He could do an Exorcist movie.
That'd be cool. He would make a cool I know they already did the Exorcist TV show, but he would make a cool miniseries. Like I think if you want to, I mean, at a certain point, these remakes or the sequels are like practically remakes, where it's like, oh, we're doing the Exorcist again, but it's got 2 little girls, and
it's just as scary, but times 2. I'm like, yeah, this sounds like a gimmick.
Yeah. Actually, when they talk in the trailer about like, oh, their heart rates are sinking, I'm like, oh no, it's making me think of the Heretic.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, Matthias writes, Matthias Van der Rust, who's been on Wrong Reel a million times, says, hey guys, almost forgot this was happening tonight. I like the original trilogy quite a bit. Curious about the new movie, but it'll probably be kind of meh. Yeah, I think everybody should keep their expectations modest. Cribbs writes, the preview did not sell me. I thought it was for The Nun 2. I did not see The Nun 2. I don't think I saw The Nun 1. The Nun first appeared, I think, in The Conjuring 2. So I've been exposed to The Nun, but I'm not in love with The Nun.
I know what he's saying, that like it looks generic. It looks like it's just another horror movie. It's not anything special. I mean, there's also we didn't even talk about the prequel situation, which was a big fiasco.
With Rennie Harlan and Paul Schrader. Give the short version on why there are 2 versions of the same movie that were released back to back.
It was going to be directed by John Frankenheimer. He killed over. They brought in Paul Schrader, and he directed a movie which it's like we're saying, these aren't necessarily horror movies, but his movie wasn't scary. I think is maybe the big issue with that one. And
I'm sure Hardcore and Cat People and Blue Collar are probably more scary. I've not seen his prequel, and I have no interest.
And then I think the studio was like, oh, we got a problem. So they brought in Rennie Harlan to do a scarier version. His version's basically just schlock. I mean, there's a Czech expression that the more you play with
I'm
shit, the more it
shocked. I'm
stinks.
shocked that Rennie Harlan
And,
delivered a schlocky film. I cannot believe that is so.
Rennie Harlan, I like Rennie Harlan, and it's kind of funny to me that there was a time when he was the guy who turned down doing Alien 3 because he's like, this is too much like Aliens.
I think he peaked with The Long Kiss Goodnight, but I think Cutthroat Island maybe is due for a critical reassessment.
He's got a couple really good ones. I liked his recent Diablo of Pass kind of found footage horror movie. I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, the Rennie Harlan version came out. It sucked. There were people saying like, oh, like maybe the Paul Schrader version's like a secret masterpiece. They released that. It also sucked. Everything about the prequels kind of sucked. Supposedly, like, I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that Schrader only had $35,000 to do the post for all of his Exorcist prequel, which like $35,000 to do post-production. It's like nothing. So that's why the visual effects are like,
the
garbage.
one day,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. But,
all right, well, I got a question you might like from Skullman. He writes, does Don't Look Now count as a horror film? If so, that's my favorite horror film of the 1970s. I mean, no matter whether you count it or not, I'd say the first 5 minutes and like the last 2 minutes are some of the scariest fucking shit I've ever seen. But what I like about Don't Look Now, I always say this, that it's got the best version of married sex in movie history. Everybody likes to say, like, talk about, once you get married, like the sex fades, it gets boring, it's repetitive, blah, blah, blah. If you are considering getting married and you're worried that your sex life will drop off a cliff, watch Don't Look Now and be like, all right, I'm going to get married tomorrow. That looks fucking amazing. But what are your feelings on Don't Look Now?
Yeah, I'd say, again, it's not like a conventional horror movie, but it's pretty horrific. That opening scene really gets you. And it's also influenced a bunch of horror movies. So yeah, sure, it's a horror movie.
Yeah. Like I would say it's in that same family of movies like The Devils by Ken Russell, where it's not a horror movie, but it's fucking horrific and it's fascinating.
It's horrific.
You can't take your eyes off it.
Yeah.
All
The
right,
Devils,
so,
that's a pretty great one to kind of pair with The Exorcist.
Couple folks thanking me for membership, so thank you all for watching and sticking with us. And we'll definitely be coming back with more live streams in the not so distant future. What else is in here? Martin writing, "I'm still here." Well, that'll be the subtitle for the live stream. I'm still here.
It's been pretty good so far. I don't want to push my luck, but.
No, I think now that we know the live stream is going to work more or less just fine with you, I think we got a good 100 topics that we're going to want to get to.
I think it's going to be more live streams in the future. I didn't mention this yet, but what I also didn't really like in terms of somebody kind of revisiting this territory was Friedkin's documentary, in quotes, The Devil and Father.
I've avoided that. I'd much rather watch interviews with him because he's such a good storyteller. And I was lucky enough where I got to see him speak publicly a few times while he was alive. And at Orson Welles' 100th birthday celebration at the Film Forum, he was introducing his favorite Orson Welles movies and also selling his book, which I think is called The Friedkin Connection. Yeah, I think it's called The Friedkin Connection, which I've not read, but just such a delightful guy. And I think my favorite story is when he's talking about, I was going to some film festival where someone was talking about how they thought Batman versus Superman was better than La Dolce Vita. And he said, I mean, fuck them and the horse they rode in on and the boat that brought them over and the dog that followed them. Fuck them all. Like he remained fiery to his dying day.
There's that clip of him speaking with Nicholas Winding Refn.
I'm going to finish what you said because Refn came across like such a little whiny douchebag in that series of interviews. But I loved that conversation.
Refn's films that he just gets like eaten alive by Friedkin. It's great.
Well, he shows me, he's like, Billy. And he's like, you can call me Mr. Friedkin. I was like, yes, like that's so fucking good. But I like Nicholas Winding Refn's movies, but in terms, he's trying too hard to like have like a persona. Like he's
also, and
Friedkin
he's a little bit socially awkward, I think, and he kind of uses that to gloss over, but Friedkin, basically eats him alive. There's a quote
I saw
Refn
was so good about publicly with Marcus Penn when we went and saw the Neon Demon here in New York, and he did this whole shtick whereas he went up on stage for the Q&A, he was on his phone and he was boasting and bragging about how he was on eBay making a bid for some poster for a pornographic film from the 70s, and I could tell he's just trying a little. He's just trying too hard. One of my friends used to say that about everybody. They're just trying too hard. He was trying too hard to seem cool or outrageous.
I mean, the character in Nicholas Winding Refn's movies that I think he is in real life is Matt Mikkelsen's character in Bleeder.
Gotcha.
that character who works at the video store, who's completely uncool. I think that's the character that Friedkin is. Sorry, that Refn is closest to. That's my impression anyway. But anyway, I had this quote by Blatty about Friedkin that I had to write down. It was so good. He called Friedkin. He said, "Blatty is a one-man." Oh, I screwed it up. Billy is a one-man Rashomon, which I thought was like a perfect way to kind of describe Friedkin's like different versions of stories and things. I don't think it's like he's lying or bullshitting. I think it's just like, yeah, he's a one-man Rashomon. You ask him the same story at different times, you're going to get 4 different versions, 5 different versions. I mean, in some ways, Blatty's not that much better, but Friedkin is sort of notorious for, you getting multiple versions of events when you hear him talk.
Well, I somehow overlooked a super chat from Adrian Mendoza earlier for $2. I just wanted to say you're doing a great job, James. Thank you so much, Adrian. It's greatly appreciated. And a comment from Mulvey747, which gets to something we overlooked earlier. He writes, "What are some of your thoughts on the first 10 to 15 minutes of the film?" I'm just going to say the first 10 to 15 minutes of The Exorcist is a master class in establishing mood. I remember as a little kid, the point where he hears like the rocks kind of tumble and he turns around and you hear the dogs growling and fighting and that eerie sound building and the way the statue kind of like whip pans into place.
Okay.
It was fucking petrifying. And I had no idea how to articulate it or verbalize it, but it was establishing a mood and a tension that was undeniable.
And it's all in bright daylight, and the sound design is incredible. You can tell they put so much work into the sound design. They had the same
like
Foley
the guy with
artist
the wallet
who did El
and
Topo.
the credit cards. I love that dude. Yeah.
But I remember there was a Mesopotamian exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum a couple of years ago, and I went, and it's got all these like things from ancient Babylon and Assyria. And I turned a corner, and there was a statue of Pazuzu, who was a real deity, and I just had a moment of like.
Did you remember the trailer to Exorcist II: The Heretic? I am Pazuzu.
Oh my god! I mean, the first film very wisely never says Pazuzu out loud, and I think that's also something
because it sounds ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, it's also you're putting a name to something, and I feel like the film. Maybe it's Pazuzu, maybe it's the devil, maybe it's Captain Howdy, maybe all of those are the same thing. Maybe it's like you don't know. I mean, for me,
I much prefer when he just says, "And I am the devil. Now kindly unloose these straps."
I love when
actually, I think we got a clip of that. Do I have a clip of that scene that I forgot to post earlier? Hang on, let's give one little taste of the original as we wind down.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
You'd like that?
Intensely.
But wouldn't that drive you out of Reagan?
It would bring us together.
I mean, Mercedes McCambridge.
Yeah.
I mean, I love her in so many things, like Touch of Evil and friggin' like Johnny Guitar. But her voice aged so horrifically, and it was just pitch perfect.
She was like using like egg whites to gargle, and she was drinking, and she like
and
really
smoking 4 packs a day of unfiltered cigarettes.
She really went for it, and like, what an incredible voice for that character.
But,
like,
my goodness!
I love when they're playing the audio of that Father Karras records backwards, and it's saying like I am no one, and like that gives me goosebumps because it's like maybe like there's just like nothing behind this. Maybe it's nothing at all. And did you freeze?
Yeah, we both freaked out there for thinking there was a glitch in the Matrix. But I wanted to give you a heads up. Charity Schmidt wrote, it was American Haunts podcast episode 29, The St. Louis Exorcism. So anybody who is curious about that podcast, there it is.
That's cool.
Here's a comment. Tom writes, believe it or not, I haven't yet seen The Exorcist. Does Ellen Burstyn play the possessed girl, or is that Linda Blair? Well,
that's Lyndon Blair is the girl. Sorry if this is your first encounter.
Yeah, this has been nothing but spoilers. I mean, I'm gonna do what I can to do time codes, but with movies that are decades old, I don't know how to talk about them without spoilers.
I think at a certain point, you just have to be like, it's your job to keep up with the cultural conversation. Like I'm not gonna dance around talking about some of these things. But
another super chat from Paul the Bearded One Downing writes, just a tip for the content, fellas. Thanks. Thank you.
I'm still here. I don't know if you froze. or I froze.
the live stream, and they're not popping up for whatever reason on our end. That's, I
know
need to write them a note just saying y'all's interface
Yeah.
for super chats fucking sucks.
I like John Cripp's comment, Rennie Harlan character assassination, the gall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's had a very successful career and had a second life teaching people how to make movies over in China. They basically brought him over to make a couple of Chinese productions where they would just study how to make blockbuster movies so that they can make their own blockbusters. So Rennie Harlan, he's not weeping over my criticisms.
I mean, that makes me think of Friedkin going to Iraq to film the early scenes of The Exorcist. And it was after the Ba'ath Party had taken over, so things were pretty tense. But they're like, well, you know, we'll let you shoot here, but you have to teach some film crew people here and teach them how to make fake blood. Was like one of the requests. I don't know. I think the fact that they went and actually filmed in Iraq is pretty amazing. Like it just has that authenticity to it. And
skills transference is the best gift you can give to a local environment. When I visited South Africa in 2008, I had a meeting with the South African Film Commissioner for my graduation paper for business school, and I was like, well, how do you incentivize productions to come, and how can they incentivize you to accept? And he said one of the big things is if they hire a bunch of local kids and teach them how to shoot, how to be in a grip, how to be an electric, how to be a gaffer, etc. But skills transference, because then people can make their own goddamn movies until the end of time. Oh, here's a comment from the great Tony Stella. Burston - diamonds are forever. Holy mo- is she in Diamonds Are Forever? I can't even remember.
I think she is the diamond. She's forever.
Yeah, she is diamond.
Yeah.
She is the diamond that's forever. Yeah, I mean, and also when you Tony writes with Connery on it. I think this is a conversation. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me just read the whole conversation. I think I'm getting only fragments. Payman writes they should have gotten Tony Stella to do the poster. Instant sale increase. And Tony writes with Connery on it. Speaking of the poster for The Exorcist, took them 2 days to get that shot of the light coming through the window with all the mist. It's like that's what you get with William Friedkin, Owen Royceman, all these incredible craftsmen. The fact that it's been 2 days getting one of the most iconic images, not in horror history, but just in movie history, and it is perfect.
It's such a surreal image with that light coming through, and supposedly Friedkin was inspired by a Magritte painting to create that. And the film has this realistic approach until it starts running into the surreal. You know, it becomes surreal because you're putting these things in a realistic
The strap
context
should never have broken. I think she should have remained subdued. When she floats, I mean, I like the power of Christ compels you over and over again, but when she punches them, she should never hit Karis. I don't like that. I feel like all of her power should be like tormenting him with like voices of his mother.
I agree, because I think, like, you know, this demon or whatever it is, its primary weapon against these people is psychological warfare. You know, and it's kind of funny that, like,
here's a liar.
Blatty
You would like to confuse us.
Well, he was in the like psychological warfare division in the I think U.S. Air Force when he was younger, and so he learned about this stuff. And I feel like that's, to me, what is interesting about this force, or you know, whatever it is. It's a psychological exploration, and it's attacking these people psychologically, and you know, that can feel so much more threatening than like, oh no, Pazuzu's he's gonna smack you or strangle you. But I think also, like, it does kind of work in the film because it's just like at that point they've got the demon or whatever it is on the ropes, and it's pulling at all the stops to kind of shock them. And there's that really great moment where it's just going, you know, things start going really crazy, and Father Karras freezes, and it, you know, it makes me think of the scene in The Thing where Childs has the flamethrower and he just kind of like freezes because, like, you know, what you're seeing is so bizarre. And I feel like, you know, if it is a demon in Reagan, it might not actually be that powerful, you know, and it's trying to create this illusion of power where
and
you know,
admittedly in the novel has lost a few battles in the past. Another comment from a Short Throw writes, thanks, James. Hope you have these types of shows more often. Anytime Kessler wants to rant and rave, I will totally let him do so. And Leo Alvarez wrote, El Topo. I interrupted Martin earlier when he was talking about how they got the sound designer from El Topo to come in, but he contributed some of the best sounds. Like when the head spins all the way around, all that is just a wallet with credit cards and a microphone. It just shows how sometimes the most convincing special effects can have a very simple explanation.
And I heard, you know, they spent weeks just editing the sound on the
Whoop, here he comes. Here he's coming back.
So annoying. But they spent like weeks just editing the 11th reel that has the exorcism scene on it, and you can tell there was like an attention to the sound design and sound mixing that a lot of films never get, especially today when things are so rushed. And that's such a powerful tool for the film to be as scary it is and get under your skin the way that it does. I think like the sound mix, the sound design, it's absolutely incredible. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was one of the first movies where instead of using optical sound, they were using the magnetic strip, which gives you a wider dynamic range, so you can get all those.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think I'm getting close to the bottom of the comments. I apologize if I missed. Sometimes when I'm scrolling around, we'll skip if they're comments. But I'm seeing some people giving some love to the great Tony Stella, or someone's saying, Tony, you must return to Wrong Reel. It's been too long. Tom, convince Tony to do a live stream, because I would love to get even if we just get a poster in place of his image, I would love to get Tony's perspective on some obscure Japanese cinema, because no one knows more about obscure Japanese cinema than Tony Stella, or at least I've never met anybody who's got more of a passion for obscure Japanese cinema than Tony Stella.
I'm seeing a comment here. It says Exorcist II was fine. Folks just wasn't ready for such an upscale story. It went above and beyond and introduced a lot of new elements, such as the whole science angle that was fresh. So I know, like, Exorcist,
it's got its fans.
It's got its fans, So I don't like it, but again, I don't really want to badmouth it too badly.
No, to quote the great Marcus Penn, if you like it, just like it. Like, I think people sometimes get way too preoccupied about who likes what and like what team you're on. If you fucking love something, shout it to the rafters and tell people why. I'm a big believer in everybody liking precisely what they want to like. But
again, I think if you're the kind of person that I am, who comes off of the first Exorcist and then watches Exorcist II and was like, what the hell is that?
It'll throw you.
The ninth configuration is the movie.
You know who I bet loves Exorcist II is Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you listen to his commentary for Conan the Barbarian, he keeps coming back to, he's hypnotizing us. He's hypnotizing us. But he's obsessed with hypnosis. He clearly is the audience for Exorcist II, which leans heavily on hypnosis.
I mean, you might like ninth configuration more, because Stacy Keach, that whole performance, he's like in this sort of hypnotic state. The way he talks, it's so kind of slow, and it's like he's in a trance. And a lot of the characters in that movie feel like almost like they're in a dream or something like that. Yeah. Actually, I think Stacy Keach, he was in the film version of Champion Season, which Jason Miller directed. I don't know, he wanted Friedkin to direct it, and I forget why, but that didn't work out. Anyway, just made me think of that. But
gotcha. Well, here are a few more comments. Adrian Mendoza says, I just heard Tony Stella on the Film 89 podcast. He was on celebrating the 50-year anniversary of Enter the Motherfucking Dragon. And as much as Tony Stella might like Japanese cinema, he might like Bruce Lee even more. And Bill Scurry writes, Tony Stella is taking over Film 89. Payment writes, upvoting Tony Stella Live. Yeah, Tony Stella Live. Tony knows he's got an open door and a red carpet waiting for him anytime. All he has to do is say yes, and whatever the topic is, we'll do it. Jacob Wright says, Wrong Reel covered Seijun Suzuki. I'm sure Tony would be game for that show. Wrong Reel's not done the deep dive on him, but I believe he did that with Pink Smoke a couple of years ago, where they did the true deep dive on Suzuki's entire career. Oh, Tony's confirming. We did them all on the Pink Smoke. So at any rate, even if Tony says, hey, I want to come on and read the phone book to people and just, I would say yes to anything. So Tony, if you're out there, well, you're still out there, come hang. And we'll get Kessler on here as well. We'll get Kessler, we'll get Marcus Penn, we'll get the whole gang on.
That'd be cool.
Hey, well, Martin, where can people find you online if they want to talk about filmmaking or your photography or your own directing efforts or horror in general? Now it's the time to plug and promote your all your endeavors.
Sure. I'm still on Twitter at Movie Kessler for the time being. I don't know if that's going to last forever. I'm also on Blue Sky at Movie Kessler, but I haven't posted too much over there yet. And I've got something in the works for the Pink Smoke, and I've got some audio commentaries coming up over there as well. And that's where you can find me if you want to send me a message, argue about The Heretic. Maybe it's your favorite movie ever.
Yeah, I mean, once again,
I don't know
if there's a cult out there that thinks The Heretic, Exorcist II, The Heretic is the shit. Bring it on. You
Yeah.
will not offend me in any way, shape, or form by disagreeing with me. I feel like when people get into these rooms where everybody has to have like the same opinion, but then what's the point of having a conversation? Because you already know what everybody's thinking. Like, I like a little pushback. I like being challenged. I like outside takes. So if somebody wants to say Repossessed is the best Exorcist movie ever made, bring it on. It's definitely got the best nude scenes of any Exorcist movie ever made. So on that note, we are going to, Devontae Huntley says, I will be the cult leader. I love it. Very, very, I'm totally down for any and all cults surrounding any movies, but we're going to wrap this sucker up because I kind of got to go TT. We've been gone for 2 hours, but we will definitely be back with another live stream in the very near future. And hopefully I can get like a roundtable discussion with a couple people about a horror related topic in October, but we can't thank y'all enough. Oh, Simon O'Neill writes, is The Exorcist better than The Omen? Find out on Wrong Reel 666. Yeah, Wrong Reel 666 is right around the corner, and Simon's going to be on.
I love The Omen too, but I think Exorcist takes the cake for me.
On Massacre. I adore quite a few horror movies. The Exorcist, just because I saw when I was 10, it remains my my all-time favorite horror movie. It's got a lot of contenders. Oh, and Robert Amaro was in the chat as well. Yeah, all kinds of European pals joining in. Everybody in the chat, whether you do podcasting or you're a podcasting expert, everybody's invited to hang on these live streams because I need guests. I want to do a lot more of these. So just send the pitches my way and we will line them up. So on that note, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. Find me on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. A couple episodes of Wrong Reel. I'm cooking. I've got a Howard Hawks episode cooking in the oven. It's going to be an absolute monster, but I'm almost finished with it. But we can't thank you enough for your support. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.